Okay, welcome everybody. Fantastic evening ahead for the next hour or so. We've got a brilliant guest, that's for sure, and I can't wait to pick his brains, and I'm sure you're exactly the same and excited as I am. Before I introduce myself and get onto the guest in question, I think we've just got a quick little message and intro from Cooley from HIGH5. So Cooley, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me? Hey everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining. I only need 2 seconds. Just wanted to jump on, and if you see my name pop up in emails or anything, this is my face. So it's the one way we can kind of meet during COVID and everything. So hopefully, yeah, you all have a really good time tonight. It's very casual, but it should be super informative because Nick's got a wealth of experience, and I'm really looking forward to what we chat about tonight. So. Yeah, enjoy it, and any questions, chuck them in the chat box, or you can hit us up with them afterwards. But yeah, hopefully you get a lot out of it. I'm sure you will, and enjoy, and I'll chat to you guys soon.
Cheers, Cooley. Thanks very much. So just to introduce myself very quickly, I'm Phil Kelly. I'm from an organization called Pro-Noctis. We partner with HIGH5 to run these workshops on behalf of them. And we're super excited to be here tonight. We've got Nathan Abbott as well, who's one of our performance consultants in the chat box. So please do, throughout the next hour, engage with Nathan, throw any questions in there. If there's something that we're talking about with Nick and it's quite topical and you've got a follow-up, just throw them in the chat and we'll do our best to make this as interactive as we possibly can. And without a doubt, the next hour will go extremely quickly if we get a high level of engagement. A little bit of housekeeping though, please, just because we've got potentially over 100, 200 people on the call, if you could keep your camera and microphone off, that would be fantastic, and make sure that this evening's as smooth as possible. But without further ado, amazing to be having Nick Anderson from running with us tonight. Nick, how are you doing? Are you as hot as me at the moment?
I am. It's boiling, isn't it? But thank you. Good evening, everybody. And your intro is far too kind. Far too kind. Thank you.
Not at all. Not at all. And just researching you the last couple of weeks since we managed to get the date fixed. You've got such a fascinating background, Nick. For those that maybe don't know that much about you, the bits that stood out is obviously coaching elite athletes. You're coaching grassroots and right through. You do a lot of charity work. Can you just give us a big overview picture of what you're up to at the moment and what your background is?
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I probably have been, I've been coaching now for actually just over 25 years in terms of qualification. And in the last sort of 12 to 15 years, it's been full time with everything I've been doing. In fact, it's probably been longer than that, about 17 years. And the real sort of crux of it is that, yes, I'm working with athletes that they're trying to get in British teams or teams for their home nations in terms of internationals. And that's great fun. I've always worked with young athletes and got a great young athlete project going on here in Winchester, which is busy and good. I've worked with a club abroad in Malta, Maliha, which is super exciting. But the sort of day-to-day running with us is that we support brands like HIGH5, Polar and Saucony with a lot of their running activation and coaching and so on, which is great. But we also work with sort of 15, 16 of the country's well-known charities, supporting them throughout the year with all of their running, sometimes cycling, trek as well, but mainly running activity towards all races like the London Marathon, Great North Run, all of the events that are on. So we're providing training plans, helplines, everything with that. So normally it's training days as well, but it's been a Zoom year for everyone, and it's been Zoom all the way for us.
You we're still on Zoom tonight, coincidentally.
Exactly.
I bet it's nice to be on the other side of it though, rather than hosting it.
It is. It's nice. I'm being interviewed rather than chatting on your side. This is great.
The term you used earlier regarding your work was running activation. Can you explain what that means?
In terms of the work with the brands and so on, it would be when they're launching products, there might be some training and some media activity around it, and we'll be there to normally meet people and all of that kind of work. We're always providing articles and interactive training sessions and live events or running shows and so on as well. So there's lots of work there where I guess coaching is at the core of everything I do, and there's all different ways that can happen, and that's changed a lot actually over the last 25 years, because it used to be, coaching at the club and coaching a number of athletes, and with media enabling you to communicate in so many ways now. You can reach people and just help people so easily.
I mean, I think we're obviously getting into sort of marathon season now, aren't we? That's for sure. And I'm sure a lot of the people that have sort of registered and attended tonight are sort of thinking about that. What's your sort of 2, 3, 4 things that you see in time and time again that are main topics of conversation between sort of you as coach and therefore the athlete?
At the moment, it's probably, apart from the obvious one, which is, will my event go ahead? And I seriously believe that it will, although I've seen this evening that Stirling is maybe not going to happen in Scotland. I think there's probably various reasons why, but I'm really confident of events happening this autumn. So that's at the moment all good. I think the people are worried a bit about the heat, so that's an interesting discussion, training in the heat and then actually racing in cooler conditions. People at this stage would be most of the time in the last 10 to sort of 12 weeks of their training for most autumn half marathons and marathons. So you're kind of into that phase where you get a very much more focused, I hope, and you need to sort of have a plan or some rough direction of travel with what you're doing, and know where the key runs are going to be, how you're building up, and just really the shape you're in now and what you're aiming for that's realistic at the end. Your long runs are growing. So for a lot of people that are 10 to 12 weeks out, I'd hope in most cases, not everybody, you're pretty close to sort of 2 hours worth of running in your long runs, but you're not up to the full distance yet, because that would be way too much. So you're building, but you're kind of along the path. You're doing plenty of things like your threshold running and clever training sessions if you're quite advanced with your training and quite competitive, or if you're very new to the sport, you're really getting used to putting in runs where you're running at a conversational effort. Those are building, you're getting more confident with that, and you're starting to work out your nutrition strategies, trying to get a bit more sleep, and really working out how your recovery is starting to balance against the amount of times a week you're training and what's working. And also the amber lights that are flashing, which are telling you hopefully that those are the areas where you don't want to push any harder.
Yeah, and I think as sort of the intensity and therefore durations building up over the next 10 to 12 weeks, we're already, those of us in the UK, we're having a bit of a heat wave, aren't we? What's your sort of tips around dealing with that at the moment?
I'm actually quite pleased. People would be surprised. I mean, first of all, it's nice to have some decent weather, but if you look at a lot of the research, the data, warm weather training is actually good for you. The vitamin D aspect, the benefits to fitness are good. Of course, trying to go out and run, and this is where I'm telling people all the time to just be a bit sensible here. Trying to go out and run at your normal paces isn't going to feel the same, and you shouldn't do it. So it's very warm, it's very humid. You need to slow down. If you're working to heart rate, then your heart rate's going to be higher because your body's working so hard to try and cool you down. So you've just got to accept that running a bit slower in the heat, or when it's very warm, much slower, is going to give you the same physiological benefits, if not more, at the end of the process. But you've got to kind of almost put your ego in a box or drop the pacing mentality that you normally have and be prepared to run easier for all of your types of training. So your easy run's even easier. Your threshold running would pace-wise back off, but really you should be basing it on effort and threshold sort of heart rates anyway. So you're just scaling that back. And the same with your long runs. But I think the other thing is try and get some of your key runs done earlier in the morning or later in the evening. It sounds obvious, but some people don't. And with your longest runs in the week, get up early. And if you have breakfast before you go, which you probably should, you're going to need to set that alarm clock super early, have a light breakfast, and then go sometime afterwards and get all of it done before you get to sort of 9-ish, 10 o'clock in the morning when it's getting far too hot. But it's really good for you to go out and do some of your easy runs. So your recovery runs, perhaps your 30, 45-minute relaxed runs when it's warmer. So do go out mid-morning, mid-afternoon, or even lunchtime if you have time sometimes, because that adjusts the body's internal thermostat. And then when you go to do runs that are in the evening or in the morning, they will feel so much better because you've become acclimatized. So easy stuff can be done sometimes when it's a bit warmer, but do your quality work and your long work early or late in the day. And that should look after you well.
I just want to, I'm going to state the obvious, I suppose, but I'll join a couple of dots with a few of the things you were saying there about all those top tips you've given already about, running early, not going too hard. I'm guessing what you're saying is run to RPE sometimes rather than to your heart rate, especially in hot temperatures. I suppose those that aren't doing that and aren't putting those steps in place are probably starting to notice and spot those amber flashing lights in terms of, you know, fatigue and recovery and everything else. Yeah.
So rate of perceived exertion, I think, is a constant for all your training all of the time. So always look at your perceived effort and your work rate, and then also use things like heart rate and so on as a guide alongside that. And that's really important. But I think, you know, if you've been really struggling with sleep for a number of nights because it's been so warm and you know you're tired, maybe you've just got to accept you've got to have a few more easy days before the weather breaks at the weekend, and don't try and overcook it and then have a problem. I think do also look at, are you really hydrating well before you go? It sounds obvious, but you're having things like a zero tablet in a drink in the hour or two before you go. Are you hydrating on the way around the run? And obviously when you come back, so is your hydration strategy really good? Because this is going to test it. You know, if you are one of these people that sweats a lot of salt, are you really getting in the right types of drinks as well during and before and after? And at the same time with all of that, just bear in mind as well that when it's really warm, you're probably going to burn carbohydrate even more quickly than normal. So you definitely need to be eating well. But of course, sometimes the last thing you feel like doing is eating as well when it's really warm, but that can go the wrong way very quickly. And within a few days, you're underfueled, tired, and everything seems to be going wrong. And it's some simple changes. Try and keep your sleep good, nutrition stay strong, and think about those key sort of sodiums, magnesium, potassiums getting into the system before, during, and after.
What's your, so on that, I mean, very much what you were talking about there, that's a constant from the elite level right through to you know, club level runner. I think maybe some of the people on the call are thinking, I do try my best, but life gets in the way. You know, I've got kids, you know, I've got partners, I've got a job, and they might be going back and forth the office these days. What's your advice in terms of being realistic, you know, in terms of and being kind to themselves? I can imagine people can beat themselves up quite a bit.
Well, I mean, the one thing that's true about the British weather as well is that it doesn't stay this warm for that long. So, you know, if maybe this has to just be a slightly easier week or whatever, and that's what you've got to do. But I think you've got to look at the overall journey here, and you're looking at 10 to 12 weeks if you're doing something in the autumn. So that, as a coach, I would never expect everything to be fantastic for the whole 12 weeks. It rarely works that way. There's going to be the odd week here or there where things aren't quite so good. So look and learn at what's been going on, and maybe just accept this isn't quite the week for you. But don't go down with the plane. You know, if it's not right, back off, have a couple of extra days off, regroup, and let's make the weekend or next week a good week. And I guarantee in 10 days time, 2 weeks time, you'll look back and you'll have forgotten this moment, and you'll be great. So just stop digging the hole and be sensible. And that's probably one of the big things in marathon prep, half marathon prep, whatever you're doing in that last 10, 12 weeks. There will be days when you're going to be tired anyway, and it won't always be the days that you thought it was going to be. And if life is getting in the way, juggle things around a little bit, move your long run, and just look at what you've done over a 3 or 4 week period, not what you think you've missed, because you won't have missed much.
That ability to zoom out and have that perspective, the bigger vision, is so important. Only last week, I think I told you, Nick, on Friday when we had our initial call about an athlete, it's a cyclist, and they text me and said, look, I'm really disappointed. I couldn't train today. I said, okay, just tell us the story. And they were like, well, I couldn't hit my numbers. I couldn't hit my wattage on the bike during the warm up. So what did you decide to do? Well, I decided not to train. I went, good decision. But because they hadn't completed the training, they saw that as a massive negative. I said, no, this is brilliant. You're starting to identify and recognize what's going on with your body. You should be celebrating this. Now, the flip side of that, I think, and this is where my question's going, Nick, is there's a difference between listening to your body and making excuses not to train and procrastinating. Is this something you see with your athletes?
I think there are those that will say they're going out for a run at this time in the morning, and at 4 in the afternoon, they still haven't gone, and they're pushing it back further and further. Now, there's several reasons there. I mean, one could just be that you're a bit of a lazy type and you're going to need that kick up the backside. And you're probably the same type that unfortunately left your revision for exams and everything else to the last minute. And you got away with it in your schoolwork and exam life because you can cram, and it's okay. You can't cram your training for a half marathon or marathon or whatever. It's weeks of training. It's no fluke with it. There's no last minute, I can do this in the last week. It's not going to work. So at some stage, you've got to really, really decide how badly you want this, because that's going to be a big judge of you going out. But at the same time as well, if I always say this to people, if you're not scratching at the door and enthusiastic about getting out for your run and doing your training, it is quite often a sign that you're tired. And you know, if you're the type of person that never struggles with motivation, you love what you do and you look forward to training normally, but actually suddenly there's a few days where it's like, I just don't want to do this. And you know when you're making excuses. If that's you, I think you're just overtired. Have a couple of days off, eat well, sleep well. You'll bounce back by the end of the week and be running through the door and the bricks next to it as well.
It's a fine skill, I think, for us as all humans, is to listen to the body and get in tune with it. One of my good friends is an elite runner, and an elite runner in terms of ultra endurance events. And he was telling me a story that he's so in tune with his body that actually you can tell just by feeling his skin, you know, even when he's running, of how hydrated, dehydrated he is, etc., and maybe what he needs, what he doesn't need. What's some of the peculiarities you've seen with some of your elite athletes in terms of how in tune do they get?
When you know them really well and you've worked with them for a long time, if you're there with them when they're training, you can sometimes tell just by the chats you have before they even start warming up and so on. You can tell by the body language, you can tell by the way they warm up, how focused they are, or where it's really going. And actually that's the same with everybody I work with once you've got to know them, the young athletes and athletes at the club and so on. So I think body language, the language that's used, is the big giveaway. But then there's other things where there's those that will come up with more excuses than normal, why this isn't going to be a good session. And we all can sandbag a bit or get the cotton wool out, but there's some that would just do it more often all of a sudden. I think by and large, it's a case of the more you get to know people, you can spot the subtle differences. And then you know, how many times though have I said to someone, look, just go and warm up, or I'll tell you what you need to do, just go out and do the first 15 minutes of that run. And if it feels wrong, and after 15 minutes, you just turn around, come back, don't worry about it, it's fine. You just need a day or so easy running or rest. But how many times have they then gone on, and I've seen this in races, they warm up, oh, it's going to be awful, I feel terrible, blah, 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 blah. And then the gun goes, the adrenaline shoots into action, and they absolutely fly. And there's been scenarios with that where, you know, people have had a cold 4 or 5 days before setting world records. They've only turned up because they felt they ought to. And the reality is they were fantastic when it actually happened. You just never know. So I'd always say, warm up, give it a go, see what your body's going to do. And if it's not working, then turn around and go back, or back off and turn that session into an easy run instead.
Tell you what I was thinking of. You sparked a few things in my head, joining some dots there, Nick, and it was around. Of course, we try and map science to everything. You know, we try and use everything as evidence based, but sometimes you can't explain it through science. And I think what you were giving there was good examples of, I feel terrible, but I run a PB. And sometimes you feel great and you just can't get moving. You know, and so we do. All of us have days like that, don't we? Where just legs are heavy, or you know, we hit the output's just not there. It's about minimizing those, about all the other bits you were talking about that care when you're not training and when you're rested and recovering.
Yeah, and also do bear in mind there's different types of recovery. So, and I don't want to be too bogged down with this, but you've got your cardiovascular recovery, which you can measure with your heart rate being lower, and you know, you feel good aerobically as you're running. Okay, you feel recovered. But it is quite possible that if you've been doing a lot of conditioning work, or there was something very strenuous you did running wise earlier in the week, that the muscle damage is still there. So you can be running along and thinking, God, I'm not firing today. My legs feel heavy. I don't feel like I'm really connecting. I'm not running well. But the reality is the legs are still tired in terms of the muscular repair. But heart rate wise, and the rest of your body has repaired. You've recovered. So you've got what I call cardio type recovery, and you've got muscle load type recovery. And both of those are relevant. And that's why when you taper in the last week or so before something big, you reduce you keep going with the strength work and core work, but you start to reduce that as well, so that everything's recovering, not just your heart rate or your cardio load.
I suppose linked to that as well, that would be obviously the psychological and the emotional stress load, because you know we're all bombing around, we've all got busy lives, and the fact of that importance of that taper is just to recover the whole body, isn't it? The whole system.
It is, and I always say, look, you want a scenario where you're gradually doing less, so that's coming down like this. You're eating really well and normally, and in the last day or two, you may even eat slightly more carbohydrate and so on. You're resting even more, and eventually we see the energy then do that, and that's what we're really looking at with a taper. I don't get people to run less or do conditioning work less than they normally work, because I think what you're familiar with creates your routine and it creates your confidence. So, the last week I would still run and train as many times as you normally do, but everything's easier and reduced so that you arrive at the end of the week super fresh. That's simple, really. But
yeah, when you say it like that, it is. And you're making me laugh because on Sunday I'm doing a triathlon, an Ironman actually, as part of the relay race, and I've got the bike leg. And there was a guy posting in one of our WhatsApp group, is anybody else tapering and eating the whole house at the moment? Because obviously it's the classic one, isn't it? And then you're going to get a huge carb dump and feel bloated and feel heavy. And we're 5 days out. Is that quite common with
It is. And you know what? When you go away with athletes before a marathon, you get to see some things that are really revealing, because you've told people so many times that this would be wise, practice it with your long runs beforehand, do a half marathon or two in your training, go through the same routine to a point in the final few days so you're going to be all right. But you see them in the last 24 hours eating stuff that, and I say, do you normally eat that? No, I've picked it up at the exhibition, or I've read a magazine and I'm going to try it. I'm like, whoa, stop. Don't do anything you haven't done before and stick to what you know. And the idea is not to stand on the start line like Henry VIII or Mr. Michelin. It's to stand there and feel full of energy, but light and fresh and healthy and ready to go. So people run, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week, and suddenly they're taking 3 or 4 extra rest days in the final week or so, and then they're wondering why they feel sluggish, and the metabolism's dropped down so much that of course it's going to take them half the race to get going again. And in fact, probably the day after the race they feel better than the race itself. So with your taper, gradually reduce the intensity and the duration, but don't reduce the frequency.
There's so many stories about the day after, certainly with some of the club athletes that we talk and work with, where they've done exactly that. They've gone out and raced on a Sunday, when they do tend to be. They haven't performed particularly well, so they're really angry and frustrated that night. And then they go out and do an amazing run on the Monday, and then they're super frustrated that they didn't do that on the Sunday. But it's all about that prep before, isn't it? So
and I would argue, if that's you, then have a look at your warm-up. So did you really warm up well enough to get everything into the right zones and really get everything going before you then start the race? Did you, and I quite like things like in the final few days doing a run where you still progress through some of your paces in the final sort of couple of days. So you maybe go from easy to steady to threshold to quicker, just to open up. And that might be over a period of 30 minutes if you're quite experienced, and you do something like 10 easy, 10 steady, 10 at threshold, and then afterwards you do some fast strides, and everything's still switched on and buzzing, but you haven't created all the levels of fatigue that are going to make you tired, and everything's alert. I used to myself, and a lot of runners I work with, I used to always run the day before a race. The great Bruce Tuller, bless him, who's no longer around, used to call it an enzyme stimulation run. And you go out and you're basically getting your metabolism going, getting everything firing and the enzymes moving again, so that you would then feel better the day after. So even before your marathon, I do 20 minutes a day before.
And I think that resonates with a lot of people. What about the people that think, for them, it doesn't work. They prefer to have a full rest day. Isn't it a case of, well, that's fine, it's personalized.
If it works for you,
yeah.
And that's the thing. If it works for you and you've tried it, then stick with that. I think that's fantastic. People used to say that, Paula would sometimes have a couple of days off before she raced. She tried it and it worked for her. I mean, most athletes, when you really get to know them, have tried various things. Yeah. And they tend to then arrive at the one that works the best for them. And then they, they've got their lucky pants as well, and off they go. Yeah. And one of the guys we've been working with for the last 2 Olympic cycles, they're a cyclist, but the new strength and conditioning coach came in and started getting him deadlifting, but he's got a bad back. And he said, I know that doesn't work for me. In fact, it'll put strain in my back, so I won't be able to ride my bike. And they made him do it, and then he got injured. And then they went, I know my body, I've been around for 20 years. And I think that's about that, again, that coach-athlete relationship that we've been having good, honest, open conversations, isn't it? It is, and you listen to the athlete and you look at what the athlete does, you look at what they've written, you do all of these other things with them, but at the same time, there just comes a time, I think, as a coach, you are there to guide and sit next to them in the car, and the athlete's in charge, but sometimes you've just got to wrestle the steering wheel back a bit because it's about to do something crazy. I think that's the way I describe it.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. It's a great analogy. There's loads of questions that came in before
Far
and
away.
during,
Yeah.
and I think it's getting into the more technical stuff now. So
Yeah,
let's talk about principles of that 10-week lead in then. What's your top tips for that? People that are prepping for it, everything from training, nutrition, a lot.
so if you've got a really major race or goal in mind, it could be an ultra, it could be, half marathon, marathon, 10K, whatever. Let's speak more marathon and half marathon for now. I think, and I've always felt that everything you do up until about 9 weeks out or so is preparation and foundations. You're kind of at the base camp of Everest, acclimatizing and building your training. You may have had a good season before, so the fitness is there, or you've been building back up. That's fine. When you get to about 9 weeks out, I think you've got a period from about 9 weeks out through to 2 to 3 weeks out, where then you're fit, but you're now ready to do the best training sessions, the best training weeks, and give yourself 6 or 7 weeks of real work and a chance to adapt. And that's when your body's going to make the bigger jumps. Okay, and this is the real training and the tuning of the training. So I think if you're 10 weeks out or so now, you're just about to come up to the key 6 or 7 weeks. You might have 1 or 2 other races built in, which are going to be markers along the way, or race pace practice for other things coming up. You're going to have 1 or 2 slightly easier weeks in there, I hope, because you're going to cut back sometimes a bit, just so you can do 2 or 3 weeks of good work, then have an easier week, 2 or 3 weeks of good work, then another easier week. And you're almost looking now to, rather than be at base camp of Everest, you're now looking to go partly up the mountain, come back down again, go partly up the mountain, come back down again, and then we're going to put a flag at the top. And that's going to be when you're looking to peak and do it. So any training plan you're on now needs to be progressive. It needs to have the key sessions in. It's going to take you on a journey. It's going to test you. It's going to work you hard in some places. And it's going to be very specific now to your overall A goal, the main goal you've got coming up.
Talk to me about the nutrition and hydration strategies then. Is any top tips there? Because I read a lot of stuff around, especially marathons, you're talking 40, 50, 60 grams of carbs per hour, or your gels. Everybody's slightly different, I know. Where's your start point when you're working with an athlete?
So it's what you feel comfortable absorbing, and it's what you feel you can take on whilst running at your marathon pace, if it's a marathon. Because let's face it, the first mistake that I see people make, if I'm honest, is they take their gels, but a lot of your long runs in marathon training are much slower than you will run the event at. It's only in the last 8 or 9 weeks, 10 weeks, you'll start to include blocks of marathon pace and so on. But the mistake people make is they take their gels and they do most of it at an easy run pace. And then, of course, their marathon pace is slightly quicker normally. And that then is a different art. And you've got to practice your gel taking as a strategy, really getting that right. So I would practice getting out of bed early, having a good breakfast and working with different breakfasts to see which ones are going to be your go-to one eventually. Working on the timings for that. I quite like people to sit sort of energy sort of type drinks or energy source type drink up to almost 30 minutes before they go even. Whether you take a gel before you go is up to you. Practice it, see how you feel. That's your decision. But then you need a strategy in those kind of long runs that's going to be one that you've practiced in training, and you might take your gels every so often. The other mistake I see with people with nutrition in the race that they're doing and in the key training runs is they tear the top off of the gel. And those who've heard me talk before will say, oh, I know what he's going to say. They whack it down like it's a Jaeger bomb and they're out in a club 18 to 30s night. And this is a shot. It's not a shot. This is 20 to 60 grams of carbohydrate, and it's going to go down and hit your stomach wall. And if it goes down in one big lump, you're probably going to absorb some of it, and the rest of it, your body's going to do that or that with, or it's going to be uncomfortable. So sip a little bit, keep running. Sip a little bit, keep running. That gel is going to take you a few minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, to consume. Okay. And get a frequency with the gels in your running that you're used to for long stuff. Get into good habits, coming back and eating well when you come back from training. But if you come back from some runs that you just don't feel like eating, go to some foods and find foods that you really enjoy and have them available, so that when you come in the front door, you're just going to have something which is going to lift you a bit, so you then eat properly later on. And that might be that you're needing some real recovery fuel and the recovery drinks alongside. In terms of, I think people can absolutely destroy their training with nutrition in this period that I'm talking about. In fact, anytime, but this period, because people are busy, and what they do is they leave long windows in their day, and the blood sugar levels drop. And what they don't realize is that's damaging your carbohydrate stores and the way you're going to feel, not today, but actually for a couple of days or so. So be organized, and good breakfast, good lunch, good evening meal, but snack really well in between and have food around you all the time. I know we always talk like this, but you're this train going down the lines, and you're constantly chucking coal on the furnace, the old steam train at the moment, to keep that furnace burning, which is your metabolism. As soon as those lights go out and we stop and we slow down and we go into that sort of depleted, low blood sugars era, you're damaging how you're going to feel in training for the next 2 or 3 days. So really be on it.
I suppose as well, if they're depleted and then they're going out and training and putting high sugar, high energy, high carb gels in, the stomach's not going to be too happy with that at all, is it?
No, we get some unusual spikes and some unusual feelings, and we also get some unusual emails and messages and phone calls to the coach. And it always comes back to, we didn't get the basics right before the run, or the day before, or during the run.
Yeah, we talk a lot about sort of managing your energy, whether it's physical or emotional energy, but also try your best not to borrow energy. And what we mean by that is, caffeine. I'm busy, coffee, rather than, because that obviously is a stimulant, but also it suppresses your appetite, and then you have that extra gap. I think it's almost like the food comes first, doesn't it? Your nutrition comes first.
It is. I mean, I think coffee's big in running and cycling, and caffeine. And I would say try the caffeine gels, particularly in the second half of the events. I think they're great. Yeah. See how you get on with them. I think you've got to look at what's going to suppress, what's not, and what gives you the best feels when you go out and run, and what you feel you've recovered from, and record it, write it down. And running is eat, drink, sleep, run, eat, drink, sleep, run, wherever it is, and just keep repeating these processes, because this is where we are in this 9 weeks. But I am a big believer in treats. So I think a glass of wine and enjoying yourself is fine. I think, you haven't got to eat like a complete saint all of the time. Enjoy yourself, please, as well. Get it in perspective. I've seen some great athletes eating terrible food from time to time, but boy, do they eat good food most of the time.
Yeah, it's all moderation, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you had much dealings with the new HIGH5 slow release?
A little bit. Still sort of experimenting, getting used to it. And I can see totally in terms of carbo loading what it could do for you. I think probably on the bike as well, it's going to be even better. I'm interested to see what it's really like for some people in longer events with running, whether there is something there that might be useful as well. So still early stages, really.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same, and I'm going to be using them on Sunday. I've been using them in my training. I'm getting on really well with them, and I'm doing exactly what you're saying. So I've got the energy load in at the start. We'll talk about carb loading in a minute. Energy loading at the start. Then I've got some of the slow release stuff, and then I've got the gels, and then the gel caffeines towards the end. Almost your emergency food towards the end, just to keep you there for a bit of morale. And I find them great. Carbo loading has been a question. I can't remember the name of the gent who asked the question. So I know I've seen this 4 days before. I've seen it 24 before, 36 before, 16 pizzas. What's your take on it?
Okay, so I've got 1 or 2 athletes that still do a version of the very old-fashioned bleed out type diet, where they still train, because they do big volumes anyway. They train pretty well the weekend before, and then suddenly shut off to carbohydrate to a point, or reduce it dramatically. And then a number of days before the event will start then eating lots of carbohydrate on the basis that they see this rise. If I'm really honest, I'm not a fan of it. I prefer you to eat normally in the final week, and the fact you're gradually doing less training, but eating normally, maybe in the final 24 hours, not eating as much protein, you're eating slightly more carbohydrate to replace that. That for me would be enough, because I think you can only store so much. And I think sleeping comfortably and feeling comfortable in the early stages of your race is more important. So for me, eat normally in the final week. The crucial thing is not missing meals and snacking really well in the final week. So you don't have those days where you're so busy you haven't had time to eat. If that happens in the final week before a big race, that will affect your performance Saturday or Sunday.
Yeah, that can literally put you back days, can't it?
Yeah.
Linked to that really nicely was a question from Deb when she said, when she's feeling on long runs, she's just starting to wonder, is there an alternative to gels and sweet stuff? She finds it gets a bit boring and feels claggy too. So,
well, it depends on the speed you're running at, because there's no rule that says you have to have gels. And I mean this very politely, if you're running slower, maybe you're 4.5, 5.5, 6.5 hour marathons, which are great, really respectable, covering the distance, you're constantly moving, but because the intensity is slightly less, there is a chance you can break up your energy bar into small bits and just pop bits of that in your mouth as you go along. You can have banana, you've got your flapjacks. So you could mix that up with some of the gels and actually have what I call real live food, rather like you would do on the bike, because your stomach's not moving dramatically. The higher your heart rate gets, the harder you're pushing, the harder it is to take on live food. So you want to be taking on gels or sports drinks, which are going to give you the carbohydrates and all the electrolytes you need quickly and comfortably. And it's very hard to do real food in that mode. The guys who are doing ultras, look, you're running so far, there's no way you're going to do it on gels. You're going to use those sometimes within the ultra, and it's almost going to get you out of a hole sometimes, perhaps. But you've got to become really good at eating on the move. And you're going to go from sweet to savory and practice all different foods on the way around, because you've just got to get the calories in at times when you've been out for hours and hours and hours. And practicing that in training is really important, alongside your energy bars, your gels, and the hydration.
Definitely. Let's go post training, post events then. So let's talk about recovery. Hey, it's clearly important, but what's your top tips for that?
Try and be as organized as you can. I mean, the biggest tip I've got is don't do that thing where you think, oh, well, I've not got any food with me, or what I have got with me is unhealthy, so I'll leave it a couple of hours. I'd rather you had something unhealthy after you've trained, but still ate, than nothing at all. So don't try and be this saint. You've got to get calories and food in you, because that is going to make a difference to later in the day and tomorrow and so on. But yeah, look, if you can get, sports drink, recovery drink going in the first minutes and so on, it's cold out of the fridge, it's going to feel better and taste better. Do all your conditioning work, your core work or exercises you need to do after you've trained. And then if you could eat within half an hour to an hour, even if it's a snack, and then you eat again an hour or two later, that's going to be really good. So I know people, I used to get back from training and be quite lucky that I could eat lots straight away. I was always pretty hungry. I know other athletes that have something and then they'll eat properly 90 minutes later, because that's how they work. But get it in. It's so important.
Great stuff and some top tips there. I just want to jump into the chat box and some of the email questions we've come in. So we start really answering some specific questions then. One from Ross, how many miles would you suggest to run the week before marathon? Currently an averaging 20 to 22 miles a week,
right?
Around 4 runs, looking at a sub 350.
Okay, good. So what I would do, Ross, is still do the 4 runs that final week or so, but you're going to bring the volumes down. So you might only run 10 to 15 miles before you do your marathon at the weekend. If you're running, the marathon's one of your runs. So if you went out and did 45 minutes and then a couple of 30-minute runs, but maybe one of them had some effort in it, some threshold running or something that's just going to get you going.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Ross. Sean was asking something quite similar, but how long should your longest run be leading up to a marathon?
Great question. Oh gosh. So this is the debate, isn't it? Sometimes, and this is where this could kick off now. I don't really like runners doing much more than about 3.5 hours as their longest run. And when I say 3.5 hours, I'm very politely talking about people that are going to be running sort of 3.5, 4, 5, 6 hours in the marathon. I think there's a danger that 3 or 4 weeks before, if you've gone out a number of times and then you go out 3 or 4 weeks before and go out for 20, 21, 22 miles, but it takes you 4 or 5 hours to do it, and you've done that a number of times in training, I think you're going to leave your marathon in training. So I think the marathon is a leap of faith. Very few elite runners ever run 26 miles in training. Most will cap it at 22, 23 miles, but they're doing all clever things in that. what you've got to do, I think, is probably somewhere around 22 to 23 miles in training, or no longer than 3.5 hours or so. Now, I know somebody's going to come back and say, that might mean I'm only running 17, 18, 19 miles for my longest run. Do you know what? If that's what it is, don't worry, because it's actually 12 weeks of all the other training that accumulates. The threshold running is going to give you the last 10 miles of the marathon, because it makes your heart work well for longer, just as much as the long runs give you time on feet. So you're fine that last 6, 7, 8 miles on marathon day if that's you. Don't leave your marathon in training.
No, brilliant. Thanks so much for that. I got a great question from Laura. I'm loving this one. I've read it a couple of times. I have one pace, slow,
No, you don't.
slow.
No.
I'd like to run faster, but don't think I'll be able to maintain this. My current longest run is 10 miles, which takes about 2 hours and can't do without stopping. Would love to do the half and a marathon at some point non-stop. Any tips for upping pace and running non-stop?
Okay, so no one's got one pace, Laura. I'm so sorry. But it's very easy to go out at an effort, which is, I would say, relatively comfortable, and you just chip along at that effort. I guarantee that you could slow down a little bit more. Everyone could slow down a little bit more. And actually, I think most people quite often run their easy runs too hard. Most people should make their easy runs really easy, sort of zone 2, 60 to 65, 70% of the maximum heart rate, really conversational. And then you're going to get all the capillarization, the red blood cell work that you need, but also you're going to recover at the same time and get good at metabolizing stored fats. So slow down compared to the way you're normally running, Laura, and that's going to be good for you. I know that if we put a tiger behind you, you'd soon sprint. So there's a top end speed, but what we've got to do is find 1 or 2 of those zones that lie between your running now and absolutely sprinting for the bus. And this is where your kind of threshold work exists. And you've just got to get used to going out and pushing a little bit harder and making it comfortably out of control for a little period of time. And if that's a minute, 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, and you do a 45-minute run with 3 by 5 minutes, where those 5 minutes, you just pick it up a little bit and just try and do 3, 4 word answer effort, controlled discomfort. You're already running in zone 4 by then, and it's controlled discomfort, and it's really developing the top end of your aerobic window, and it's really good for you. So sorry, Laura, I know there's different paces in there, or efforts. I tend to call them efforts more than paces, actually. It's efforts. So look at it as a change in effort, not a change in leg speed, because you could be going uphill and you've changed zones. You're going downhill, you'll have changed zones. So don't look at it as speed, look at it as effort.
What about some of the old school ways of looking at it? I find they can be helpful in terms of, you know, sometimes people like Laura may be fairly new to running or any form of exercise. Sometimes they're ill-informed in terms of how long that conditioning phase is, you know, for the body to adapt just to running, and they're seeking improvements and therefore performance metrics almost too early. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I used to do it when I was. I mean, I'm 50 now, and you know, for me,
no, you're not.
I am.
No,
I am.
Not.
You know. So look, late 70s, I started doing a bit of running, and sort of just before really the 1980 Olympics and the co-Ovette sort of rivalry that was there, the Clash of the Titans as it was then. And I was so into this. I remember I got into my running, and I would leave, you know, the front door, having looked at the kitchen clock. I had a loop around the estate or around the golf course. So there was these 2 loops. And I honestly thought that running was a sport where you had to try and be faster every time you ran. And you get to a point maybe where you just expect, surely every time I run, I'm going to be fitter. And in the early weeks that happens, but that doesn't happen for long. And you then hit that zone or that plateau phase where you're going to need to start to put all different things into training and run at different intensities in the week and create a structure. And I think this is the thing for new runners and for all runners. You'll have a base phase in your training if you're experienced, where you go back to just doing aerobic work, hopefully sometimes, and creating more red blood cells and building that base. I always say that's at the bottom of Everest, you're acclimatizing again. And then you'll get into the key parts of your training where you periodize into either the busy part of your season or the key races you're doing. And this is where even the newer runners, if you start to include some threshold work, increase the length of one of your runs, making it into a long run, and strategically place those things in the week, my God, will you see improvements compared to running around the block.
Brilliant, brilliant. Great advice and great tips. Right, Nick, we've got loads of questions. People have warmed up in the audience now, so I hope you're hydrated.
Yeah. Quick answers.
We're going to go through. So from Nick, what's the taper length? How long is too long or too short?
I tend to say, I mean, look, for elite runners, it can be less. Okay, I would say that, and I've got different things that I do with people, but generally speaking, for marathon, 2 to 3 weeks. So your longest run would probably be 3 or 4 weeks out, and then the long runs start to come down. But the rest of your training doesn't change in marathon prep, I think, until really the last week to 10 days. And then the rest of your training will start to cut back. So you might do a key training session 9-10 days out from the marathon, and then you'll start to cut back. All right. I think half marathon, you can still do a good long run a couple of weeks out, and then you'll start to cut back. 10K, be careful what you do the weekend before in terms of distance, but you can still do something intense the weekend before, and then you'll be having an easier week. 5K, very much the same.
Brilliant. Nick Graham emailed in this morning. Are there any alternative forms of exercise, cycling, cross-training, etc., that Nick would recommend if you're forced to take a short time out from injury or missing a training?
Okay, so I would recommend you do them anyway. I think most top athletes, if we're honest these days, don't just run. They're cycling, they're swimming, they're aqua jogging. There's only some that can get away with massive volumes of running, and that's all they do. So your conditioning work, there's 2 types of cross-training. Your conditioning work, for me, that's like you're brushing your teeth. You should be, a good athlete is a fidget. It's somebody that's doing plenty of stretching, plenty of mobility work, and some core work. That's your bread and butter, and that should happen, actually, some of that nearly every day, and the core work, if you could, little bits of it during the week, and then some conditioning work to get you stronger. So some lifting, some work that's going to actually strengthen you to be better in posture and better running technique. Really, really important for injury prevention. Then look at your cardiovascular cross training. So time on the bike, go for it. Fantastic. Look at the Brownlees. They've been 2 of our better 10K runners for the last however many years, and yet they spend most of their time sat down on in a saddle or swimming, floating in a pool. It works. Okay. Beth Potter's been running fantastic stuff this summer, and she's a triathlete. And she's doing great running sessions, but loads and loads of cycling and swimming. So please, cross-train, swim, cycle, get out there. The only thing is, if you're cycling, you're probably going to have to spend more time on the bike to get the same effect as you would do running. So, an hour run might be a 2-hour bike. That's what I would say.
There's an element of enjoyment in there, Nick, though, isn't it? I mean, my mate who's running the marathon on Sunday, he bumped into the Brownlees on the Yorkshire Moors on mountain bikes. They were just out for the day. They went, we were in Leeds, so we come up with the Yorkshire Moors and we're out. We're going to go as far as we want to go for 10 hours.
It's cardiovascular work. It's going to help you. So, look, I've worked with, I'll give you an example. At one stage a few years ago, I was working with one female marathon runner that was running twice a day every day, conditioning work and core work. So 110, 120 miles a week, perhaps. The other one, and she was running 2 hours 30. The other one was running 2 hours 31, so only a minute slower, but was only running 5 times a week. Now I know that's still a lot, but 5 times a week, but was doing loads of cycling and loads of stuff in the pool. So you can achieve great things, do what's right for you. Just bear in mind with cross training, it's low impact, so you're less likely to get injured. So if you are a runner that's had a history of injuries, or you risk, because biomechanically you could get more injured or injured more easily, please cross-train a lot more and don't do too much running. Don't get injured, okay? You can cross-train and get some great running in around that.
Brilliant tips. Cam's emailed as well. They were asking, there's a lot of stuff around training for the Brighton, I think it was. But the question in particular was around fluid loss. So obviously what they're guessing in terms of weight loss in fluids and what their Garmin's guesstimating what they've lost. Where do you stand on that?
I'm not a fan with that, if I'm honest. I know you can, at the moment, sweat rates and so on will be through the roof because it's so warm. I think you can only take on so much as you're moving. Okay, so that kind of idea works, you would think, in practice, but in reality, it's what you can take on while you're moving. Kipchoge arguably struggled in his first attempt at breaking 2. Because he couldn't take some of the drinks on and he had to change things for him. So all I'm going to say to you here is practice taking your drinks on the move, work out a strategy that works for you and what you get on with, and drink almost to first or a little bit ahead of it. Don't go in with a regimented routine and think you've got to do this exact amount per hour or whatever, because the reality is it won't always work like that, and your body will get used to a little bit of what you've taught it, but listen to what it's telling you as well. So try and stay just ahead of first all of the time.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Amy's asking, heading off my first half marathon, got a bit of an iffy knee. Is there a preferred thing to focus on regarding the training? Is it HR, pace, distance, etc. as I build up towards it?
I'm a big fan of heart rate. I work with Polar, so I'm really interested in the sleep metrics, the heart rate training zones. I think it's a great way to tune your training. I think perceived rate of exertion is probably the most important thing, and then heart rate alongside it. But I think the key components of your marathon are the long runs, and then in the last 10 weeks, putting in marathon pace practice in different blocks or in progressions. I think your threshold running sort of 75 to 85% roughly of your maximum heart rate, and blocks of that during the week, or threshold runs. Those are your two key areas, because you're really developing your aerobic system. Then some easy runs before breakfast during the week to get used to working with stored fats and metabolizing that. And if you're more of a performance orientated athlete, then doing some work in the upper zone every week or 10 days just to keep your VO2 max where it needs to be, or actually progress it.
Yeah. No, that resonates with me. I've just come through a 2-week block myself of just trying to increase my speed on the bike, but in my aerobic zone. And obviously with the weather change and that, and it's really zeroed in, just zeroed my focus in on what I'm trying to achieve. And
do bear in mind that if you work in the aerobic zone and you work easily in the aerobic zone, but you're working it for a long time, if you're creating more you're building more red blood cells, there's more capillaries in the muscles to transport all the nutrients, and the mitochondria's got stronger. When you then try to run faster, in theory, you can uptake more oxygen because you've created more red blood cells. So one of the strange things with endurance running is slow running and creating this base actually helps you to be a faster runner. So slower can sometimes make you faster. Don't just think speed comes from being fast. Speed comes from having a good endurance base and working your aerobic system, and then just putting some icing on top of the cake.
Yeah, lovely. Great stuff.
Okay.
Another good question on Nick. I'm an ultramarathon runner, and as anyone who does these distances will know, the GI distress happens. Do you have any tips about trying to recover from it and when it hits midway on a long run?
I was talking to someone about this earlier in the week, actually. Alex Cook, who's a nutritionist with our business, running with us. I think that kind of distress, you've got to look at the things you ate just before and what you ate during, and whether there's certain foods that are going to kick that off and so on. Certain intensities and certain durations, though, with some runners, and there seems to be more research being done in it all the time, seems to cause more GI distress than it does for others. And if it is you, I think you've just got to take it very easy for a few days and then get back onto what is comfortable eating. I'm not entirely sure that people are 100% certain on why it is with some people that kind of distress is there. Certainly things like higher fiber foods or different types of carbohydrates seems to trigger more with some people than others after a certain duration of time.
Yeah, great. I think there's a lot of research going on in that space at the minute as well, isn't there? I mean,
definitely.
Obviously hydration is a massive issue, so trying to keep on top of that. Right, great. You've talked a lot about snacking, even during the day, training outside of it. What sort of things do you recommend?
I mean, bits of energy bar, banana, oat cakes, rice cakes. If it's the snack mid-morning and it's not the one you're having before you do a run, then include protein with that. Clever. People talk about nut butters and nuts and whatever it's going to be, protein that's going to work for you. Okay. I would say to you, in a couple of hours before you run, the snack needs to be more bland and carbohydrate based. It's just fuel. You don't really want protein because it's not going to give you the energy you require. It's going to be uncomfortable to digest and process.
It's a good point. I think a lot of people think the energy bars are just for training, but no, they're complementary either side. Yeah,
definitely. And I have a simple saying with people, and that is never hungry, never over full. So as an athlete, if you stick to this motto that you're never going to get hungry, but you're never over full and uncomfortable, you're probably going to be getting it just right.
There's a good debate in the chat going on about bacon and egg sandwiches before a race, but we'll skip that one. You start getting hungry. Good question from Julia as well. She's on point. She's on brand. She's talking about she's doing a half Ironman with snacks, gel, sports drinks, HIGH5s, etc., including their mini cheddars. We talked about savoury bits and flapjacks. But have you got any suggestions for what I should eat in transition?
Well, a lot of it depends on which transition as well, because some people get out of the water and actually eating is quite hard, and drinking could be hard as well. It depends how much you swallowed on the way around the swim, I guess, and so on. But I think if I'm honest, it's going to be that horrible politician's answer of what's worked for you in training, and don't try and change it. You possibly can, in transition from swim to bike, think more about live food because you're going to be sat on the bike. I think the transition from bike to run is one where you've got to be careful, because that's where the gut's going to be uncomfortable. So you need to be fueling on the bike ahead of your run, rather than thinking, I've always thought about fueling in that second transition. The first one is sometimes the easier one to do.
Sometimes you just fancy different things as well, depending on, you know,
yeah,
the time of year you're doing it, etc. And
it's that thing as well, like with the ultra runners, you know, as the race progresses, they'll be having more and more savory stuff, sometimes peanut butter sandwiches, bagels, all that sort of thing suddenly comes in to play, because they just don't want anything more sugary and so on.
Yeah. The body doesn't want it, and sometimes just that taste in the mouth, which is
exactly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you're lucky enough to get, you know, a sweet Haribo, other brands are available. Just sometimes that different flavor of sugar in your mouth could be a massive bit of morale more than anything else.
Vary it.
Yeah.
You know, good old bit of Kendall mint cake. Go for it.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Okay. Last couple coming up, guys. We are running out of time. We've got loads of great questions coming in, so we'll cover that off at the end. For a developing runner, do you recommend doing intervals on a treadmill to control pace zones? I find this useful. Also reduces chances of falling down the curb.
Okay. Look, treadmills are great. We've got one here. Use it. I've always used them. Do remember that a treadmill, the belt's coming towards you. I've never run on a road where the road's coming towards me. So put it up 0.5% or 1% and keep training, but get out on the road, because you've got to create your own energy and momentum. The treadmill, you know, is great for controlling, and I think you can really get your zones right on a treadmill. So I get it with threshold running, tempo running. It can be really useful sometimes, so do that, but please get out there and try and generate that feel sometimes out on the road as well. So mix it up, use both.
Brilliant. Nick, there's another 40 questions in the chat box, but I'm afraid
I can keep going, but you've got to stop, haven't you?
Yeah, we have, unfortunately. And I think it does help for the next bit I'm setting on. What we're doing here with the team at HIGH5, these videos all go up on YouTube, ladies and gents. So if you haven't already, jump across to the HIGH5 YouTube channel, subscribe, hit the little bell for notifications, and every time new videos are uploaded, you'll be notified. This particular one will be up probably within the next week once it's been edited and bookend. And please do share it. If some of these top tips, which have been amazing, I've learned a lot, I know that for sure. If any of these are going to resonate with your family, your friends, your colleagues, your club mates, please, once it's out in the domain, in the public domain for free, please do share it, because I think it's not often you get, you know, a good solid hour with someone like Nick, who can just freestyle it with all this wealth of knowledge he's got, and add value every single minute. So just in terms of wrapping up, Nick, on behalf of myself and especially HIGH5, thanks very much for giving up an hour this evening and all your insightful comments. I hope you enjoyed it too.
Been an absolute pleasure. Great fun. I'd happily do it again.
It's gone so quick, hasn't it? And I'm sure we've got loads of follow-up questions. Those that are still on the line, if you have got follow-up questions, you've obviously got my email from last night. By all means, fire them across to me. What I'll do then, I'll pass them on to Cooley, and then Cooley will be able to sort of get some responses from Nick. Nick may even do it in a one-stop shop half-hour video. We'll see how many we get in, but we're trying not to let anybody be left disappointed here, and you get the answers to the questions you're after. But for now, guys, thanks so much for your time. Thanks very much for joining in. Please go and interact with HIGH5 on social media. They're on every platform you can find. And for now, until the next one, thanks very much and take care of yourselves. Cheers, Nick.
Good luck, guys. Keep training well.